After my in-laws' extravagant party at a fancy restaurant, my husband pushed the $8,900 bill toward me and said, "You want to be independent? Prove it." I paid, speechless. An hour later, they called me screaming they found a note I slipped into the checkbook. If you looked at my life from the outside about a year ago, you might have thought, wow, Monica Carter really has it made. Good job at Mount Sinai Hospital as a senior nurse supervisor. A husband who ran a so-called consulting firm, whatever that actually meant, a son, Caleb, who was 15 and only mildly insufferable compared to other teenagers. A decent brownstone apartment tucked into the quieter end of East 89th Street. Enough money to take a yearly vacation if I budgeted carefully. But what people didn't see was the loneliness. The underhanded comments. The way I was always the one keeping the gears of our life turning while Brandon floated. I grew up believing marriage was supposed to be a partnership. That it meant teamwork, support, respect. Instead, it felt like I was a houseplant Brandon occasionally watered so he could say he took care of me. That night, the night everything broke open, started like any other family obligation, with me gritting my teeth and pretending. Martin Carter's 70th birthday. Brandon's father. A man so obsessed with his own legend that he practically wanted a ticker tape parade thrown every time he picked up a golf club. We were supposed to meet everyone at Le Cuckoo. If you haven't been, imagine a restaurant so fancy you're afraid to breathe wrong. The kind of place where even the breadbasket feels judgmental. As we were getting ready, I stood in the bedroom, tugging at the hem of my navy blue dress. "You think this is okay?" I asked. Brandon didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, whatever." I stared at him, wishing just once he'd really look, really see me. At the restaurant, the maitre d' led us to a private room in the back. The whole Carter clan was already there, Martin sitting at the head of the long table like a king, his second wife Sandra perched beside him, dripping diamonds, even though it was a Sunday evening. Cody, Brandon's useless little brother, lounged across from them, looking like he hadn't worked a day in his life. "Monica," Sandra called, voice sharp and sugary. "Love the dress. So brave of you to wear that color." I swallowed the insult, smiled, took my seat. Dinner dragged on forever. Plate after plate of food I could barely pronounce, let alone enjoy. Conversations about stock markets, trips to Paris, who had the better penthouse views. At some point, Martin leaned over to me. "Still working at that hospital, huh?" "Yep," I said, sipping my wine. "Still saving lives." He laughed like I'd told a joke. "I always said," Martin said, shaking his head, "nurses are just glorified assistants. It's the surgeons who matter." I gripped the edge of the table so hard my fingers ached. Brandon didn't say a word. After dessert, some delicate tower of pastry and cream that collapsed the second you looked at it, the waiter placed the leather-bound checkbook at the center of the table. Silence fell. Martin stared at it like it wasn't his problem. Sandra tapped her manicured nails on her wine glass. Cody slouched back, pretending not to notice. And then Brandon reached for it. For a second, I thought he was going to do the right thing. Instead, he slid the checkbook right in front of me. "You want to be independent?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Prove it." I blinked at him, my heart pounding. "What?" "You said you didn't want to rely on me anymore," Brandon said with a smirk. "Here's your chance." I looked around the table. Nobody met my eyes. The waiter stood stiffly to the side, expression blank. I could have said no. I could have stormed out. Instead, my pride roared louder than my fear. My hand shook as I pulled my card from my purse and shoved it inside the checkbook. The waiter took it without a word. $8,900. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. When we finally stood to leave, Martin clapped Brandon on the back. "Smart move, son," he said. "Teach 'em young." I didn't say a word on the ride home. Brandon leaned back in the Uber, humming some stupid pop song under his breath. When we got home, he dropped onto the couch, kicked off his shoes, and started scrolling his phone like nothing had happened. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at him. That's when I remembered. Before I closed the checkbook, I'd scribbled a little note on the back of a cocktail napkin and slid it under the receipt. One sentence. "The Carters don't tip, they just strip dignity." It felt petty at the time, but I was too furious to care. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen counter, staring into space. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. "Martin." I let it ring. Buzz. "Sandra." Buzz. "Cody." I sighed and answered. "What the hell is this?" Martin bellowed. I held the phone away from my ear. "What's what?" "The note, Monica. The goddamn note." Sandra screeched in the background. "Honestly, I'm surprised you can read," I said calmly. "You listen to me, you little, Martin's voice broke into a crackling growl. You think you can humiliate this family? Pretty sure you did that all by yourself, I said, and hung up. The next morning, Brandon exploded. You're a child, he screamed, throwing his coffee mug into the sink where it shattered. You're a coward, I shot back. Hiding behind daddy's money like it makes you a man. You'll regret this, he snarled. I already do. For weeks after, it was war. Martin tried to call my boss, spreading lies about me. It didn't work. Nurses protect their own. Brandon tried to freeze me out financially, but guess what? I had my own savings. Real savings. Not Bitcoin garbage. Eventually, I filed for divorce. It was messy, ugly, but it was also liberating. One day, sitting in a tiny lawyer's office in Midtown, signing the final papers, Brandon looked at me across the table. You'll never make it without me, he said, voice low and bitter. I smiled. I've been making it despite you. I left that lawyer's office with my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even fear. It was space. Empty, wide-open space where all the noise used to be. I walked down Fifth Avenue in a daze. Tourists snapping pictures, yellow cabs honking, the smell of pretzels and exhaust in the air. For the first time in years, nobody was waiting for me. Nobody asking for anything. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with the sun on my face. That night, in my now quiet apartment, I sat on the living room floor eating takeout straight from the carton. Caleb was at his friend's house. Just me, my General Tso's chicken, and the sound of my own breathing. The next morning, the text started. From Brandon. You'll regret this. You're throwing away everything we built. Dad says you'll come crawling back. I stared at the screen for a long minute before deleting them all without replying. Later that day, as I was charting patient notes in the nurse's station, my friend Selena leaned over. Hey, she said cautiously, is it true Martin Carter tried to get you fired? I rolled my eyes. Yep. Selena shook her head. Damn. You good? I thought about it. I will be, I said. Weeks blurred into months. There were little things I had to learn. How to manage the mortgage alone. How to fix a leaky sink without Brandon pretending he'd get around to it and never doing it. How to take my car for an oil change without feeling like I needed permission. Some nights I cried. Sometimes for what I lost. But more often for what I never really had in the first place. The Carters froze me out entirely. No surprise there. Caleb, surprisingly, took it better than I thought. One night, he sat on the couch next to me, fiddling with the hem of his hoodie. You happier now? He asked bluntly. I blinked at him. Yeah, I think I am. He nodded. Good. I hated the way Grandpa talked to you. I froze. You did? Yeah, he said, shrugging. He's a jerk. I laughed then, a real, loud, unfiltered laugh. You're not wrong, I said, ruffling his hair. For the first time in a long time, I realized Caleb wasn't just watching me survive. He was watching me fight. It was early spring when I ran into Sandra. Of all places, the Whole Foods near Columbus Circle. I was standing in the produce section, trying to decide between organic kale and the regular kind, when I heard that voice. Monica. I turned. Sandra stood there in a cashmere coat, heels, perfect blowout, eyes sharp as knives. I considered pretending not to hear her. Instead, I smiled. Sandra. She gave me a tight little nod. How's life, post-Carter? She asked, voice dripping with faux sympathy. Peaceful, I said, tossing the kale into my cart. Sandra's lips curled. You know, Martin still says you'll come crawling back. Women like you? Women like me? I interrupted, stepping closer. You mean women who don't put up with being treated like dirt? Her nostrils flared. For a second, I thought she might actually slap me. But instead, she smoothed her coat and sneered. You'll never find someone like Brandon again. I grinned. God, I hope not. I pushed my cart past her without another word. My hands were shaking when I got back to my car, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. I wasn't the same woman who sat silently at Le Cuckoo pretending not to hear the insults. The next big blow came 3 weeks later. I was meeting Selena and some of the other nurses for drinks after a BRTL double shift when my phone rang. Blocked number. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. Finally, I picked up, hissing, who the hell is this? Monica. Martin's voice. I froze. What do you want? I asked coldly. I'm dying, he said flatly. I blinked. Excuse me? Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Martin said, voice hoarse and flat. They're giving me 6 months. Maybe less. I stood there in the middle of the bar, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses fading to a dull roar. And? I said after a long pause. I want to make things right, Martin said. before it's too late. I laughed, short and sharp. Now you care about, right? Come see me, he said. Please. He actually said please. I hung up without answering. Later that night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about it. About how many times I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. About how often I'd swallowed my pride. About how many years I'd spent pretending Martin's approval mattered. I wasn't that woman anymore. But part of me, the part still aching from the wreckage, wanted something. Not his apology. Not even his guilt. I wanted to face him. To look him in the eye and show him he hadn't broken me. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of Martin Carter's building. The doorman gave me a once-over like he couldn't figure out whether to let me in or call security. I gave him my best, I'm not in the mood, stare, and he buzzed me through. The lobby smelled like expensive leather and lemon polish. I took the elevator up to the penthouse, my stomach twisted into knots. I could have turned around. I could have told myself he didn't deserve the time of day. But I didn't. When the elevator doors slid open, Sandra was already there, arms crossed, her face tight and pinched. You came, she said like it was a personal offense. I'm not here for you, I said, stepping past her. The penthouse was exactly what you'd expect. Marble floors, massive windows looking out over Central Park, modern art pieces that probably cost more than my whole apartment. Martin was in the den, slouched in a leather armchair, looking small. That's what hit me first. He looked smaller, shrinking into himself. His skin was grayish, his cheeks hollow. He glanced up when I walked in. Monica, he rasped. I stayed standing. You said you wanted to see me. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made something sour churn in my stomach. I'm dying, he said again, like I needed reminding. I thought you'd want to hear it from me. I heard it just fine the first time, I said coolly. He closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. I was hard on you, he said. I laughed, short and sharp. That's one way to put it. He opened his eyes again. I was raised to believe men should be strong. Women should be accommodating. I blinked at him. And that made it okay to treat me like garbage? No, he said quietly. Silence stretched between us. I don't expect forgiveness, Martin said after a while. Hill, I'm not sure I deserve it. I just wanted to say it. Before I can't. I shifted my weight, feeling the anger and sadness all tangled up in my chest. You made me feel small for years, I said, my voice shaking despite myself. You made me doubt myself. Doubt my worth. You encouraged Brandon to do the same. He looked down at his hands, nodded in his lap. I know, he whispered. And you only realized it because you're dying, I said, bitterness cutting through me. You wouldn't be saying any of this if you still had decades ahead of you. He didn't argue. For once, Martin Carter didn't have a snide remark or a dismissive wave. He just sat there, gray and broken. I don't forgive you, I said finally. Not today. He nodded slowly. But I added, voice thick, I'm not going to carry you around anymore either. You don't get that kind of space in my life. He looked up at me then, something raw in his eyes. Regret. Maybe even sorrow. Fair enough, he croaked. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, he said, Monica. I stopped. For what it's worth, he said, coughing, you were the best thing that ever happened to Brandon. I didn't turn around. I just walked out, letting the door click softly behind me. Outside, the city roared around me, life continuing like it always does. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, breathing in the smell of car exhaust and street vendors and spring rain on concrete. I thought I'd feel triumphant, victorious. Instead, I just felt lighter. Like I'd finally put down a burden I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. The weeks that followed were a blur of slow, steady rebuilding. I finally replaced the squeaky bathroom door Brandon had always promised to fix but never did. I let Caleb repaint his room whatever horrible shade of neon green he wanted. I started taking long walks after work, wandering down to the river, feeling the city pulse around me. One night, I ran into Iris, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We grabbed coffee at a little diner that stayed open until 2 a.m. So, Iris said, blowing on her cup, "You're really free now?" I thought about it. "I'm getting there," I said. She smiled. "You're glowing." I laughed. "That's just the diner lighting." But later, lying in bed, I realized she was right. There was a glow inside me. Small, but steady. A fire I thought had been snuffed out. Of course, freedom didn't mean everything was easy. Brandon still popped up sometimes. Late-night texts that swung between angry rants and pathetic pleading. One afternoon, I got a call from Caleb's school. Brandon had shown up to talk to him unannounced, causing a scene in the front office. When I picked Caleb up, he threw his backpack into the back seat and slid in with a scowl. "You good?" I asked carefully. Caleb shrugged. "Dad's being a weirdo." "Whatever." I hesitated. "You know you can talk to me, right?" "I know, Mom," he said, fiddling with the window latch. "I'm not stupid. I know how he is." I reached over and squeezed his knee gently. "I'm proud of you," I said. He didn't say anything, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. About a month later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it cautiously, heart thudding. It was from Martin. Only a few lines. "Monica, I know you said you don't forgive me. I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. Proud of how you stood up. Proud of the woman you are. You deserved better from all of us. I'm sorry." Martin. I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I folded it up and slid it into a drawer, not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. Spring melted into early summer. The days grew longer, the air heavy with the smell of hot pretzels and blooming trees. Life, little by little, started feeling normal. Well, my new kind of normal. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. I started sleeping through the night without waking up tense and aching. Caleb finished his sophomore year, proudly dragging home a B+ in chemistry like he'd just discovered penicillin. "You know," I told him, smiling over dinner one night, "you're gonna change the world someday." He grinned, stuffing his mouth with pizza. Duh. Already working on it. It was a small, stupid moment, but it stuck with me. That was my win. Not Brandon's. Not Martin's. Mine. It was about 2 months after Martin's letter that the real twist, the good twist, came. I was on my lunch break at the hospital, scrolling through emails when a subject line caught my eye. Invitation, Carter and Company. Charity Gala. I laughed out loud, earning a weird look from Selena across the break room. I opened it. Apparently, Brandon, or more likely Sandra, now the acting face of the Carter name since Martin's health was rapidly declining, was trying to save face by throwing a massive charity event. Publicity stunt, plain and simple. High-profile donors. Media coverage. Black tie dress code. And they were inviting me? Clearly a mistake. But the idea took root in my brain. Slowly, carefully. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my pen against my teeth. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for a little payback. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down the sleek black dress I'd bought, fitted, classy, with a neckline just daring enough to make a point. Caleb popped his head in. "Whoa," he said, eyes wide. "You look badass." I laughed. "Thanks, bud." "You gonna make Em cry?" he asked, grinning. "That's the plan," I said. I kissed him on the forehead, grabbed my clutch, and headed out. The Carter and Company. Charity Gala was being held at the Plaza Hotel. Of course it was. I walked through the grand revolving doors, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. Heads turned. Sandra spotted me first. She was across the ballroom in a sparkly gold dress, fake laughing at something some hedge fund vampire was saying. Her smile froze when she saw me. Brandon noticed a second later. He was standing by the bar, drink in hand, looking just as smug and slimy as ever. He went pale. I smiled sweetly, took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, and waited. It didn't take long. Within minutes, a man in a tailored suit approached me. "Monica Carter?" he asked. I blinked innocently. "Not anymore. Just Monica." He chuckled. "I'm Matthew Crane. I run the Carter Foundation's legal advisory board. Mind if I steal a moment?" "Of course," I said smoothly. We stepped aside, near a giant arrangement of white roses. "I hear you were married to Brandon Carter," he said, polite but probing. "Was," I corrected, taking a sip of champagne. He nodded, serious. "And you managed a lot of the Carter family's philanthropic accounts, right? Helped organize events? Handled the budgeting?" I smiled wider. "I did everything," I said. "Budgets. Scheduling. Damage control. Quietly fixing messes before they became scandals." Matthew nodded slowly. "And you kept records?" I gave a delicate shrug. "I'm a nurse. I document everything." He smiled thinly. "And would you be willing to share what you know?" It clicked, sharp and fast. The Carter family wasn't just trying to save face. They were trying to survive. The IRS had apparently taken an interest in some creative accounting practices. Brandon's so-called consulting firm wasn't as clean as they wanted everyone to believe. And they needed someone credible, someone they'd underestimated, to either help them cover it up or blow it wide open. I thought about it for maybe half a second. "No," I said brightly. "I won't help you cover for them." Matthew's smile froze. In fact, I added, if anyone asks, I'll be happy to explain exactly how much money was laundered through fake charity events. Names, dates, amounts. I tapped my clutch meaningfully. I have all the receipts. His face went white. You'd destroy them? He whispered. They destroyed themselves, I said, and walked away. The best part? I didn't have to lift another finger. Within a month, stories started leaking to the press. The Carters were under investigation for tax fraud and embezzlement. Brandon lost his job. Sandra's friends turned on her faster than rats off a sinking ship. Cody fled to Florida, of all places, trying to lay low. Martin, well, he was too sick to do anything but watch it all crumble from his hospital bed. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to cry. I didn't have to throw a single punch. I just had to survive. And tell the truth. The night the news broke, I was sitting on my balcony, a glass of cheap wine in hand, Caleb beside me, both of us wrapped in a blanket against the cool breeze. You think they'll go to jail? He asked, grinning. Maybe, I said, laughing. Good, he said fiercely. They deserve it. I tilted my head back, looking up at the stars just barely visible over the New York skyline. You know what the real revenge is? I said. What? Living better without them. He nodded, serious for once. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it is. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything to anyone. I was just free. Free to build the life I deserved. On my own terms, with no apologies.